David Adler and I have been working together to put this night together, and it's wonderful to see people from all around the world joining us tonight, including our special guest speaker, Brigadier General Gal Hirsch. And Gal, I met in the Golan Heights some years ago, which was a wonderful experience that we met through my friend Tan Dori, who at that stage was with Hebrew University. Brigadier General Gal Hirsch is the founder of DG Agility Concept. He is an active reserve general in the IDF and considered one of the most experienced officers in the areas of counter-terrorism, counterinsurgency and guerrilla warfare. Gal spearheaded Israelis' fight against terror for 34 years on all fronts as a commander of several elite units as a field officer. He is a decorated soldier where his overt activities are well known and highly acclaimed in the security circles in Israel and its allies. I actually met Gal with his wife, Donna, and his young daughter, Nia, which I don't know if he remembers, up on the Golan Heights, and he was just after the launch of his first book, I think, Defensive Shield. And of course, he's written another book, which we will talk about as well as we go. But it's just such a pleasure to have you, Gal, with us. I thank you, and I thank you for being a friend and for all the things that you have done. I was rereading your book, Defensive Shield, over the last 2 days, and I'm just amazed. I call you the $1 million man, because I reckon there was more spent in surgery on you than any other man I've ever met. Steve Austin, eat your heart out. But Gal, you may tell that story, so welcome, and please share and tell your story.
Well, shalom everybody, and thank you very much for joining us. Thanks very much for the kind invitation. I appreciate it. Thank you, especially John, David, and special thank you to my brother Eitan Drori that is with us, and he is actually the chairman of Global Israeli Leadership Organization, which I appreciate, and I'm happy especially because you've made right now during this session actually a kind of a joint venture, which is good for Israel and very important to join activities and share know-how and information. So I'm gonna brief you in the next 20 minutes or so regarding things that I see as main trends and main topics that should be discussed in this very moment. And then you are, of course, welcome to ask questions, and I'm here for you. And I must say that you should be very proud of our host today, that he was very determined and showed a lot of manfulness in finding me, which is quite an impossible mission. It is a big challenge to catch me running from military reserve service to my startup ventures to my education activities, and as I told them, my only free time is when I'm driving, so from place to place. So thank you and cheers for the host and the organizers of this event. I want to discuss with you first our current situation in Israel. Discuss with you, I believe. So I believe that you are all aware of what is going on in Israel in the last 2 weeks. We are under continuous attacks of gunmen, terrorists in the streets of Israel. The last event took place 2 days ago in the main street of Tel Aviv, Disengagement Street. It has happened also in Beersheba. It has happened in Hadera. It has happened in other places, and the state of Israel actually is experiencing again terror attacks. let me remind you that this is not the first time. Every time that a new generation and comes to the scene, to the arena, and start to feel this type of feelings, the fear, the uncertainty, the vulnerability, the frustration, we must remind them that we were in this situation and much more severe situation, and not that long ago. We are right now in this Passover evening, we are actually mentioning 20 years to defensive shield operation. Defensive shield operation that I'm privileged to be the chief planner of this strike against terrorism, and the one that actually had to conduct it with 5 divisions and all the Israeli special forces against the Palestinian terror. This operation took place after more than a year and a half of bloodshed in the Israeli streets. So many Israelis were murdered in suicide bombing attacks, in gunman attacks, in the Israeli streets, in the mass populated areas of Israel. And the state of Israel experienced 20 years ago massive, intensive terror attack against all the state of Israel. And let me remind you again, it was during peace process with the Palestinian Authority. We wanted very much to believe, we wanted very much to trust. Actually, we let 7 Palestinian armed brigades to enter into Judea, Samaria, and the Gaza Strip. And you all know what has happened in Gaza, where Hamastan actually has been established with an Iranian support after the Israeli disengagement from Gaza, where in a minute that they cannot have any territorial demands from Israel after we've made withdrawal and disengagement from Gaza, including taking people from their homeland, from Katif region in Gaza Strip, and they should actually live in peace with us. You know that until today, we are suffering terror attacks, rockets launching, and it happens once a year, twice a year, sometimes every day from Gaza Strip. And in Judea and Samaria, since we've started the peace process with the Palestinians, we suffered a lot of terror attacks, and people wanted very much to believe that these are only bumpers on the road to the peace final agreement. But, you know, I believe as a field officer that if someone is shooting at you, and even if he tells you that he is going to shoot at you, you must believe. And when he shoot at you, you should not actually convince yourself that these are only fireworks. He really opened fire at you. And Jerusalem, our capital, was under fire. Try to think what would happen if Canberra was under fire, Washington was under fire, or London was under fire. And we all saw what is happening when Paris and other cities in Europe were under terror attacks during the ISIS attacks not that long ago. So actually, we, the state of Israel, are experiencing right now another wave of terror attacks in the mass populated areas of Israel, and we are coping. We are coping the way we did before. This generation is much better than us, and they are doing their best. I'm telling you that firsthand since I am still serving, and I'm very proud of the young generation of Israel. But this is also another point and topic that I would like to discuss, the education of the next generation in Israel to protect and guard this homeland when actually they know that the rest of the world are enjoying the Westerneers' point of view of good life and much more me than us. And we need an education that is completely committed, will create the commitment of the young generation of our youth to the state of Israel's security needs. Second thing that I wanted to remind you we've just actually gone through small crisis called COVID-19. I believe that most of the people cannot understand and believe how Russia with Putin actually solved the problem of COVID-19. Actually, it disappeared from the media, no COVID anymore, only war in Ukraine, and this is actually medical miracle. And I'm sure that everybody understands that actually COVID-19 was one of the biggest actually challenges that humankind had to deal with in the last 200 years. But you can see also the role of the media and public affairs when you discuss challenges or crises, because another crisis came to Ukraine, to the middle of Europe, created shockwaves that affects all Europe and all the world, and suddenly COVID-19 does not open the news. And that's unique and special, but let's remember one more thing about COVID-19. The state of Israel showed really an unbelievable behavior towards this challenge. I must tell you that I am very proud to be an Israeli when I know that actually all the Israeli bricks actually were integrated into one wall to cope against this pandemic situation. And even the Mossad, the mighty Mossad, the Israeli special forces, and the best of the best Israeli capabilities were allocated to bring swabs, ventilators, and protection gear for medical teams from all around the globe. And of course, our Prime Minister Netanyahu, with all the officials that worked very hard and still working, successfully made Israel in a military-like operation. We entered into vaccination process that made almost all Israel vaccinated. It didn't help us with the last variant, of course, as it does not help to anyone else, but that one actually behaves much more like a regular flu. And I'm telling you that firsthand. And it is not really a challenge. The main challenge was the first wave, second wave, third wave, etc. Me personally, I decided to go immediately and to volunteer to be the chief of staff of an ultra-Orthodox city when the first wave just hit Israel. And I jumped directly to this new role in the city of Elad in order to help the mayor cope in a military-like staff work in order to cope successfully against COVID-19. And I'm privileged and honored to be one of the officers. We were the three of us from the paratroopers that actually took new responsibility on our shoulders. Actually, it was to manage a city, a big one, ultra-Orthodox cities that are not well organized usually, to cope against COVID-19 and to show again that the state of Israel under pressure, under threats, unified and very effective, and we did quite a good job. Speaking about the crisis in Europe, you know, all of us are watching news, and I'm not here actually to explain the news. Two things that I would like to emphasize regarding the crisis in Europe and the Israeli context. Maybe three things. First, we saw again that war, classic war, combined with all the new types of war of cyber, cybernetic warfare, fake news, psychological warfare, and all this information warfare, etc., deception, and all the other type of soft war that we learned about in the last 2 or 3 decades. All these new type of war is combined with the classic one. We still see tanks in the battlefield, jet fighters, infantry, artillery, cities under fire, terrible damage and wreckage everywhere. That means that for us, for the state of Israel, it's not a wake-up call because we never fall asleep, but that may remind us that war is not only soft war, and we must be always well prepared against any option of invasion, because the state of Israel is one place for the Jewish people. This is our only homeland. It was built on the ashes of the Holocaust and all the diaspora experience, and we must be well prepared, always well prepared for any attempt to invade Israel or to try to harm us. And we learned during this crisis again that the state of Israel is a real address to come directly to the homeland of the Jewish people if Jewish people are under threat. As happened right now in Ukraine, thousands of Jewish families left Ukraine and made aliyah, immigration to Israel in the last 2 months. And it is sad news because it has happened after war. It is important news for the state of Israel that we know always that any aliyah wave to Israel, any immigration wave, as happened to us with the Russian wave in the beginning of the 90s, brings a big boost to Israel's strength, Israel's economy, and Israel's security. And we fulfill our mission when people know that they are always having homeland here in the Middle East, our holy land. Let me just remind the people that know that in our audience now, that just before defensive shield operation started in May 2002, I've been asked by Keren Hayesod, UAA, and by my friend Eitan Drori, that is with us now, to come immediately to Australia for 8 days. And for me to leave the battlefield for 8 days was mission impossible, but I had an order from the Israeli Chief of Staff and Minister of Defense. And why? It was because the Argentinian Jewish community was under threat, pressure, and wanted to leave immediately to Israel. We had actually to bring to Israel immediately thousands of Argentinian families because of crisis in Argentina, and Keren Hayesod, UAA, actually had to take this mission on its shoulders, and they had to finance it somehow. And I was running all around Australia for 8 days, from Gold Coast to Brisbane, and from Brisbane to Melbourne and to Sydney, and to many, many other places, 3 events or 4 events a day, and mission accomplished. And then I came back to Israel, prepared the forces, and launched the strike against terrorism. I'm mentioning that because these are 2 types of fronts for the people of Israel. One is to defend ourselves from terror and from any external threat. But the second one is that we must always be well prepared to bring our people home again. And that's what is happening in Ukraine. And another last and final thing regarding the Ukrainian crisis, again and again, I'm telling my people here in Israel that they should not forget that if someone will try to invade into Israel and to try to kill many Israel by bombing our mass populated areas in Israel, and we will be under terrible fire from Iran or from its proxies, many people worldwide will suggest to pray for us. And this is very important. Many other people will send maybe even humanitarian support. But in the end of the day, we Israelis will have to live on our sword and to defend ourselves and to fight alone for our actually right to live peacefully in Israel. And we cannot count on anyone but on ourselves, the Israel Defense Forces, and our secret services. Speaking about what is happening in Europe, and I just reminded that suddenly COVID-19 disappeared from the news, something else is hiding behind the curtains of the crisis in Europe, which is the Iranian deal. This is something that is always, shocking me when I see the United States of America and its allies negotiating like equals with this bunch of criminals, the Iranians, sitting together around the table and discussing peace agreement or any type of agreement that allow them to continue to develop nuclear capabilities. Now, someone really believes that you can count on the Ayatollah's words in Tehran after they are claiming and actually declaring that they are going to wipe out Israel from the map, that Israel is an historical mistake, they will fix it, and by the way, we are preparing ourselves to have nuclear capabilities, of course, for peaceful purposes. And the frustration to see our best allies, really our best allies, I really appreciate United States of America. There is a strong bond between my colleagues in the US Armed Forces and myself. We work together, we share information, we share capabilities, we really appreciate them, they appreciate us. And there are common values between United States of America and its allies and the state of Israel. I believe that it started with biblical roots that we are all believe in, and this is very important for our morals and values. But how come that after all our experience, they are still sitting around the table with Iran, which actually shows us permanently that they are working with the double hat syndrome. When they want to, they wear actually great tie and suit, behave like diplomats. But in a heartbeat, they transform themselves and put a kafia on their head and launching terror attacks worldwide. They attacked Israeli and Jewish sites in Buenos Aires, in Georgia, in Bangkok, in Delhi, in Burgas, all around the world. They are global instability creators. It was just published again and again and again that Iran, via Hezbollah, its branch in Lebanon, Iraq, and many other places, are drug dealers that are creating so many drug deals from South and Latin America to the Middle East and to United States of America and the rest of the world. You know that they are criminals, and you behave actually like they are just nuns. It's something that I cannot believe. I cannot believe. It sounds like Chamberlain's sentences from the Second World War II, Second World War, like you want very much to believe that they are good people and everything will be okay, but I'm telling you, nothing will be okay. And we are finding ourselves again and again with the need to be prepared to put all the options on the table, again, include the military options and other options, diplomatic options, etc. We wanted very much not to do that alone. We wanted to count on our allies because the immediate target for Iran nuclear capabilities mission is Israel. And this is something that I want you to remember, and maybe even to press everyone you can to do that. Now, a few more things that I wanted to remind you regarding what is happening here in Israel. During about a year ago, we had a mission in Gaza, and parallel, an internal front started inside the mixed cities of Israel. The Israeli Arabs, especially criminals that hold weapons from the Israeli Arabs, opened fire and started riots inside Israel until actually we successfully restrained it. And this is something we need to take into consideration, that in Israel we have a challenge to fight criminality and to make sure that our internal front will be calm and quiet. And just before I'll open the floor for question, I want to remind you that in Israel right now we suffer from political instability. We have a very, very problematic government that is combined by actually all the parties from left to right, just to make sure that the Likud party won't lead. And this is something, you know, that Israeli democracy produced in a way that history never saw before. And we feel that this government won't survive for too long, but who knows, that's politics. But this instability exists. Thanks God that the other systems of Israel are strong. I mean, the medical services, the military, of course, capabilities, and the technological theater, and the Israeli high-tech. The Israeli economy is very, very strong. And finally, I wanted to remind you that just before the last elections, Prime Minister Netanyahu with President Trump successfully created the Abraham Accords. This actually event, signing peace agreement with 4 Arab countries, created new engine to the peace efforts in the region, and all the moderate states includes, of course, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, Morocco, Sudan, and others actually are in our side, and things that we never believed and dreamed that will take place are happening, like, for example, that all these Arab countries are asking Israel to help them defending themselves, the airspace, and fighting against missiles that actually Iran is launching towards them by its proxies, the Houthis in Yemen, Hezbollah, and others. And these are things that we could not believe that will happen if we spoke about that, let's say, a few years ago. In order to keep being startup nation, strong economy as we are, one of the strong 8 countries in the world right now, speaking about economy, you know, the economic rate of Israel is AA or A+, which is one of the strongest in the world right now. Although all the crises, we hope that the sky will be open completely again and you'll come to visit us, so we will be back again to enjoy millions of tourists in Israel every day. We are the strongest cyber and AI, actually, let's say, power in the world. And the most important thing that actually affects all the region and affects all the world, and we are only understanding the beginning of it, is that somehow the state of Israel became an energy power. Because today we supply gas and energy to Egypt, to Jordan, to the Palestinian Authority. By a bypass through Jordan, we actually will start to supply energy to Lebanon. And there are a lot of attempts that Israel actually will supply gas to Europe, which creates a strong threat on other countries that are afraid that they will lose their power if Israel will start to supply from its reservoirs. This is why, by the way, Erdogan, which is not a great Zionist, tried to make again very good relationship between Turkey and Israel. And so if I have to conclude and summarize and wrap up all my words, we are a strong country, we have strong society, we have many challenges. We depend on education of the young generation to make sure that they will be ready to join the Israeli armed forces, to join the Israeli secret services, and to defend this bubble, this villa in the jungle, this beautiful place, paradise, that is surrounded by crazy people and psychopaths. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gal. Wonderful. Just extraordinary. And for those who've joined us through the evening and didn't get the introduction tonight, hosted by the AJA, and with our friends of Southern Cross Alliance for Israel. My name is John Lockwood, for those I haven't met, and together with Dr. David Adler, we've put this event together. We will be suggesting to you that if you there will be a donation way tonight and open, which I think Dr. David will put on the chat, that where you can donate for particularly the Ukrainian and Russian refugees who are seeking Aliyah to go back to Israel. So we're looking to raise a bit of money. And for those who haven't already explored the site of galhirsch.com, you will see there he has written 2 books. The first one of which I got was Defensive Shield, and the second one is Follow Me, which is a leadership book. They're both fantastic, and you can order and get them in Australia. So we encourage you to get those books. I can just, before I pass to David, I know he's got some questions. I will say to the audience, if you'd like to ask a question, you can either write it in the chat, and I think we've got Robert on board who may collate those questions, or you can raise your hand by going to the reactions button and pushing that, and we'll come to your question as we go. I just want to refer, before I go to Dr. David to ask his questions, I want to quote a paragraph out of your book, Defensive Shield, before we go there, Gal, which is where I first met you. And through your rise through the IDF and, you know, all the different positions, you placed a target on your back and the PLO were after you. And this paragraph just hit me. They got you in the end. They got you with a rock. And you say, I was paralyzed on the left side of my body. In a complicated operation, a titanium rod was inserted from my shoulder all the way through my shattered arm. My lungs were collapsed. I had broken ribs, a damaged jaw, head injuries, exposed nerves where teeth had been knocked out, a fractured spinal cord, and a shattered elbow. To say the least, the blessing of Yasham on you to come through to where you've come to now is just one of the most amazing stories, and I encourage people to get your book and read the rest of the story of 26 operations and 6 years of recovery to come now as Brigadier General. I just say thank you and bless you for all that you have put up with. And Pastor David for his first question.
Okay, thank you, John, and thank you, Gal, so much for being available for the briefing this evening. I'm just going to ask you 2 short, sharp, but important questions. The first concerns Iran, and I don't want to let you off the hook when you outlined such a major threat potentially against Israel. And you said earlier on that Israel has to rely on itself and fight alone. Does Israel have the capability, don't say what it is, but does Israel have the capability to take out Iranian nuclear facilities in the event that an agreement is reached by the Biden administration and Iran proceeds to develop nuclear weapons? Does Israel have the capability to deal with it?
So I believe that people, especially you that love, adore, and are curious about things that are happening in Israel, you all detecting us and visit us and see the Israeli capabilities. And actually, do not forget that we've arrived to Entebbe, where we wanted to rescue Israelis that were hostaged by terrorists. And do not forget that we've arrived to Tunisia in order to take off our greatest enemy, Abu Jihad. Do not forget that from time to time, rumors says, and the media says, that strange events happens worldwide to people that wants to harm Israel. Do not forget that after Munich Olympic Games and the tragedy that has happened to us when our athletes were murdered by terrorists, it was Golda Meir that has made the decision that everyone that was connected to this murder will die. And that can happen. And of course, it has happened, some of them immediately, some of them it took a few years, but no one was left from the people that were involved in murdering our athletes in Munich 1972. And do not forget that when earthquake is taking place in Turkey, an Israeli family is there under the wreckage. When the girl Shiran opens her eyes after a few days under the wreckage, she sees an Israeli officer sending his hands to take her out of the wreckage. And she is not asking, what are you doing here? I'm abroad, I'm not in Israel. What the Israel Defense Forces is doing here with the Home Front Search and Rescue Command in Turkey? She just asked one question, not what are you doing here? She asked, may I have some Coke, please? So I'm sure that that means that Israelis worldwide know that the state of Israel is just behind them. It doesn't matter where they are. In the last earthquake in Nepal, the Israeli Air Force landed in Kathmandu to bring the Israelis back home. When COVID-19 started, it was a military operation when the state of Israel brought Israelis from all around the globe in rescue flights to be in Israel. And that means that we can be probably everywhere. We can do many things, and we usually are very effective. I cannot, since I'm an active reserve general, I won't go further than that. But you can understand that when we say that all options are on the table, we are not just talking in order to talk. The state of Israel built here in the years of our independence a war machine that history never saw. We have failures, we are not always successful, but we are capable.
Okay, that's very, very good, and may you go from strength to strength in that. I'd just like you to finally, before we open it up for general questions, comment on the threat on the northern border. We hear that there's a lot of effort to upgrade the massive missile stockpile that Hezbollah controls and bring in PGM, precision-guided missile technology. We know Israel is taking it out as much as possible. How do you see that being managed, the missile threat, the increasing precision on the northern border?
Well, first, the media, I mean the international media, reported yesterday in daylight about strange phantom attack on a convoy in the middle of Syria. Things like this are happening from time to time. There were in the last year, I mean 2021, more than 50 shadow attacks in Syria. And there are other cyber attacks and other types of attacks worldwide against evil people. Now, we are doing our best to take, game changers out of the stage. But I must be honest with you, and I want you to know, Iran had successfully built huge capability along the borders of Israel, and not only along the Israeli borders. Iran is a global instability creator. And but around us, they built terror armies in Gaza, Hamas and Islamic jihadists, In Lebanon, they built an army, Iranian army, Hezbollah. They are trying their best to build Iranian army in Syria. They've built one already in Iraq. They did so already in Yemen, the Houthis. They did their best to do the same in Sudan and in Sinai Peninsula and other places. Iran is working very, very hard to make sure that Quds Force and the Revolutionary Guard will build around Israel a belt of forces that will harm Israel. It means that we are surrounded by dozens of thousands of rockets, missiles, including ballistic missiles. And when war will start, we will strike back. I'm telling that as an understatement, strike back. But we will suffer big damage in Israel, because we have, of course, multi-layer capabilities of defending ourselves, but we must be well prepared for big damage sites. I mean, dozens and maybe hundreds of damage sites all around Israel. And we will have to suffer casualties, big damage, and then to win the war and to bring this enemy territories, it can be Lebanon, it can be other places. I'm telling that with sorrow. These places will be back to the Stone Age, because we do not have any other chance but to defend ourselves. We will take damage, of course. We will suffer. That's war. But the other side will have to see what we are doing when we fire in anger. And I'm afraid that they do not understand it completely, but still the Israeli deterrence from the Second Lebanon War 2006 exists. And you see that 16 years.
Yeah. Thank you, Gal.
John?
We have a number of questions, and I'm not quite sure how we're going to get through them all. So some of you might want to put them into the chat room. And just to let everybody know, this is live streamed on AJA website, and we are recording it. So we will send those who want a copy of the recording out to you, so you can share it with other people. I see that Helen had her hand up and Jeff followed. So we'll just start with you, Helen. If you'd unmute yourself and ask your question, and please keep your questions quick and to the point.
I will. Thank you, Gal. I'm a bit embarrassed to call you Gal, but I'm Helen, so pleased to meet you. My question is, do you think that the present wave of terrorism that Israel is experiencing is a direct result of the new relationship Israel has with several of the important Arab countries who have now taken the Palestinian question off their agenda? So it seems to me that the Palestinians may be wanting to get back into the headlines around the world, and Israel is in a tight corner, because if they respond, they will achieve that for them.
Well, thank you, Helen. There's no doubt that the Palestinians, especially Palestinian leaders, if any, are frustrated completely that they lost every opportunity to lose opportunities. Actually, along the last 2 decades, the state of Israel offered them things that I would not offer them. And actually, they could get almost everything they wanted, dreamed on, and spoke about. But they preferred terror, blood, and fire. Now, the people of Israel are tired of trying to convince the Palestinians to choose peace. And alongside this phenomena, so many things has happened worldwide that the world is tired from the Palestinians. I mean, you know, the world is coping with wars of itself, with COVID, with the economic crisis, etc., etc. So many US dollars and euros and others actually were sent to the Palestinian Authority in order to build safe place and advanced place for the Palestinian people, and they used it for their own bank accounts and in order to arm themselves and up to their heads. So actually, I believe that Palestinians saw in the last few years that Israel is doing everything and even making peace without the Palestinians and without they have their capability to block this peace process. So yes, frustration may cause motivation for killing Israelis in the streets. But let's not forget that the motivation to kill us in the streets is here for more than 100 years, even before the establishment of the State of Israel. This is a religious issue. This is about jihad. This is about hate and education to hate Jewish and Israelis. And this is something that I'm sorry, I have no good news for you. This is something that we'll have to keep coping. And this is why I spoke about the need to educate the Israeli young generation to love this country, to fight for it, because they will have to carry on. You know, we are getting older, and we need another young generation to keep fighting and not to think only about good quality of life, but to fight for our homeland.
Yeah, that's great, Gal. Thank you, Gal. I just want to acknowledge, as you asked that question, Helen, the work of people like our ex-ambassador to Australia, Yuval Ratem, who was part of putting all that deal together with the 4 Arab states. But the issue runs deeper. David Shulberg, you have a question? Please unmute and ask. You're not unmuted, David. No. Go. Gotcha.
Yes, sorry. It's David Shulberg here from the Israel Connection, Gal. Just following on from the last question and what you said at the end of your talk, you spoke about crazy people and psychopaths. I don't know if maybe everybody knows about the latest incident in Israel where Joseph's tomb has been completely vandalized and destroyed by 100 Palestinians who went on a rampage. We're talking about what's driving this conflict and it's religious. Wouldn't you say that Ramadan is now a big influencing factor on the way the Palestinians are behaving?
Well, you know, we've heard about this unique combination of Ramadan, Passover, and Pasa all together in this special year. And when it happens, usually it creates much more friction, much more motivation to attack Israelis, etc. But I'm telling you, I'm really, you know, I'm well experienced with that. There is no problem of motivation to hate Jewish and Israeli people. No problem at all. Actually, you just see the photo of Joseph's tomb from last night. They actually destroyed this holy place. Now, what else do you want? Do you know what's going to happen if we will harm a mosque, for example, an important one? You probably know that. And by the way, they do not need a fact or a photo that we harm the mosque in order to tell fairy tales that we harm the mosque. They are telling stories, fake news that we want to attack Al-Aqsa Mosque, and then many people are running to get suicide and to stab Israelis, just like has happened about an hour ago near Beit Lechem. And look, we are in a continuous struggle. It is not something that we can really solve. I know that Westerniers, people from the West, people that think about handshake is handshake, agreement is agreement, a word is a word, does not understand how can't you solve these problems? You are reasonable people. So we are not discussing about reasonable facts. the Palestinians, many of radical fundamental Islamists will never agree with the fact that Israel is a sovereign country, even a successful and strong one, actually the strongest power in the region today in many domains, and they have their patience, they think about long journey, they educate the young generation to kill and murder Israelis, and that's it. That's unfortunately the Palestinian legacy to the world. I hope that one day that they will be focused on Nobel Prizes, scientists, artists, things like this. But right now, they left to the world long trail and footprints of blood. And it's a tragedy because I know Palestinians and I know the people, and many of them, so many of them just want to live normally. And they want just to live near and next to Israel. And their leaders and the religious leaders just do not let them do that.
Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah, we agree, Gal. It was interesting the other night. I saw a video of the fence between the West Bank and Israel, and people coming through and saying, we'd rather work in Israel. We earn so much more. We want to be friends, but, you know, the religious centre gets in the way. So we've got Jeff, Ron and Alan. I hope we've got 7 minutes left. Let's try and get through. Jeff, unmute and ask your question.
Shalom, Gal Hirsch. I noticed that in your words, Israel is supplying energy power to Lebanon and also gas to Europe. How about selling similar commodities to the USA, who don't seem to care two hoots about the fact that they have got massive resources that they deign not to use, and yet they don't mind buying it from you. And in the end, I noticed with great satisfaction that you won't be invited to Mr. Biden's sesquicentenary in Dementia, and I don't think you care two hoots about it. Shalom.
Thank you, Jeff. Good comment. Ron.
Well, thank you. I just want to explain that during Obama's administration, as you know, the disengagement policy of Obama's administration took strong place. And they've decided that they can disengage from the Middle East and stop being the policeman of the world, because they can be an island of independence, because they've arrived to the point of independence, even regarding oil reservoirs. So actually today, United States of America can probably produce what it needs for itself. So they probably do not need us, although our reservoir of gas is the second big in the world today, as it is known. I mean, Tamar and Leviathan. Well, reservoir is the second big in the world. The first one is next to United States of America. So they do not need us for energy. And I hope that they will understand and be back to their position to stabilize the area, because usually when you forget the need to be far away from home in order to defend yourself, you meet the enemies in Manhattan, in the Pentagon, in Pennsylvania, in San Bernardino, and the European countries see that in London, in Paris, in the Bataclan Club, and you see that in Bali, and you can even see that in Melbourne and in Sydney. This is because terrorism and radical fundamentalists just do not like normal life. They prefer blood and dreams about 72 virgins rather than enjoying the current real life in this earth, let's say.
Yeah. Thank you, Gal. David, you can see there's a list of questions that are forming as we go on, and a question whether we can extend a few minutes because we've got Ron, Alan, Miriam, Robert. Robert's got questions that have come on Q&A. I'm going to leave it to the president to decide the timing.
Well, I think we can run through a few very quickly, see how we go. Ron?
Hi, good evening. Can you hear me?
Yeah, just ask your question, Ron.
Thank you. You were talking about gas supplies to Europe, and given their need to diversify, and if Israel does supply gas to Europe, do you think that Israel can, in exchange, also get political benefits from the EU, and also stopping and curtailing funding of radical anti-Israel NGOs in return?
Well, I'm not counting on most of the European countries, especially not on the countries that are actually investing a lot of money and putting lots of resource in order to weaken ourselves here inside Israel. Many NGOs are working here in Israel because we are a democracy, we let it happen. And many European countries, not only, but European countries are financing these activities. I am not sure that we can count on barter. We will give you gas, you stop doing that. I think it comes from fundamental mindset, and that won't work. I'm telling you that supplying gas to Europe, it's a very, very sensitive issue that has not been completely decided yet, although the infrastructure is under procedures right now, because it may affect the Russian capabilities actually to hold the neck of Europe. And when Israel is supplying as an alternative, it makes Israel a big threat, not only to the radical fundamental Islamists around us. It makes Israel not only a regional power. And that's something that we need to do very, very, very carefully, because it is a fragile issue. Next question, please.
Yeah. Yes, well, we've got our normal MC, Alan Friedman, stand up right from the start. So we've got to have your question, Alan.
Thanks, John. Gal, thank you very much. I want to ask you about Ukraine. We're all watching it very closely, and I think everybody is surprised at how well the Ukrainians have done against the Russians. So my question is, are we seeing a change in modern warfare where high-tech weapons, smart bombs, drones, are they becoming a little more useful than just having physical troops on the ground? And if so, what might this mean for Israel?
Well, thank you for this question. I'm just telling you, first of all, that my response and my answer is based not on facts, but on what I read in different sources of media, okay? Because I'm not even teaching. When I'm teaching in university, in Reichman University in Herzliya, I'm never based on the media. The media has its own agenda. There is no real media, everything are agendas, and there is a lot of fake news. One thing that I must tell you about what I see in Ukraine. Yes, Great Britain, Sweden, United States of America, and other countries are supplying modern anti-tank capabilities, a lot of types of mini drones and others to Ukraine, etc. And as you see, the Russian heavy army is suffering many challenges when they're trying to maneuver in Ukraine. But this is not the real story and not the most important issue. The thing that is making a difference here is not the weapons. Let me remind us all that we saw the Ukrainians preparing Molotov cocktails in order to cope with the tanks regiments of Russia. So actually that was before they started to have so many types of anti-tank weapons, etc. The most important thing, and that's what makes a difference in Ukraine probably, is the Ukrainian spirit. The decision not to surrender, the decision to fight back, the decision actually to recruit all the national resources and to fight back, just like the state of Israel did so many times when we had to recruit and allocate all our capabilities to win a war against our enemies. So everything starts with the spirit and education of the people. And we won wars when we did not have these types of supplies. Just to sharpen my answer regarding professionalities in warfare, yes, we see new trends in modern warfare. As I mentioned before, alongside the classics war of maneuver, of tanks, infantry, artillery, and air support, we can see the combination and integration of software, and I speak about, of course, information warfare, psychological warfare, cybernetic warfare, and alongside all the classics of war. And we see things that I'm claiming for many years. Please read my book or read my articles about, for example, the 6th dimension has taken off, one article of myself, other boots on the ground, a second one, and there are many others. You can Google it and go online and find them. The war of today actually requires much more special forces, commandos, and guerrilla capabilities than classic regular warfare. Because we are having all around us so many, as I mentioned before, crazy enemies, a democracy cannot behave like criminals. We cannot have our own terror organizations, but we can have our own crazy people with license, which are special forces and secret services. And I'm telling you that firsthand. Our crazy people, creative people, special forces and secret services are very, very effective against our enemies, crazy people.
Thank you, Gal. David, we want a couple more, or are we willing to close it off?
I think we'll give Miriam and Robert 1 minute each. So
Okay.
this is pressure on Gal to answer quickly as well. Okay, Miriam. Can you unmute Miriam?
Yep.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes, go for it.
Gal, you mentioned the government being right across the board from left to right. Does that weaken the state of Israel? If the government were to fall, is Bibi hamstrung from becoming Prime Minister again? And is Ron Dermer a possible candidate for Prime Minister of Israel?
Well,
sounds a
I
bit political.
I really do not know. Just to show full transparency, I'm a Likud member, so you need to know that. If you could not identify it through my words, but I'm speaking here generally about the interest of the state of Israel. I do not know anything about the capability of Ron Dermer to be the Prime Minister of Israel. He's a very, very talented person and did great job in the United States of America. And I think that maybe Israeli politicians will be able to see the national interests and to choose during our next government the prime minister that most of the people of Israel, an unbelievable majority, believes in his capability to lead the state of Israel.
Okay. John Roberts taken off his question, so you can just close us.
Wonderful, thank you. Just wrote in there in the chat, Gal is, I think, chairman or member of the board of newsisrael.com, and we would encourage you to go online and join News Israel on com.
Please,
David
just
is
sorry to interrupt, John. It is Newsrael. It's without the I. We just combined news and Israel. Please download it. It's very important for us to spread the word. We are working very hard to spread pro-Israeli news. It's not propaganda, but this is Israel as we see it here. And we spread and broadcast Israel 24/7. You'll enjoy this app. Please download it and consume news and information about us from Newsrael. Thank you.
Thank you. And we certainly will. And I certainly will. I want to say thank you, first of all, to our hosts, AJA, to Dr. David Adler, Alan Friedman, and all the people. We really have enjoyed being a part of this, and on behalf of Southern Cross Alliance for Israel, I want to say thank you to you guys and girls, and most of all, Gal, just amazing. We are so appreciated of your time and your input, your history, your devotion to Israel, and let alone the hero of this story is actually your wife, Donna. And I wish that you would give her a kiss for me and just say, thank you, Donna, for keeping this man alive for all the time and for his purpose. So to everybody else, I say thank you, blessings, and good night.